In previous lessons, we've covered decision making in programming. So we've covered the if statement and the switch, which are the two concepts that allow us, or the two constructs that allow us to get the computer to make a decision and to run certain sections of code depending on the set of conditions. Now, the other three conditions are all about looping, okay, or what's called iteration. Now, what looping is just getting something to repeat a set of instructions over and over again. And all code is made up of just sets of looping and branching. Right? So today I'm going to be covering two of the concepts, the while statement and the do while statement. Both of these have to do with looping, and both these are very similar in that they allow us to look at or get code to repeat instructions over and over again. Now, let's just take something really kind of simple, like this. Cout hello world. Right, so this is a pretty simple program here. And if I execute the code, okay, I get hello world. Now, a question is, what if I wanted to say this, say, 5 times? Well, a lot of people would default and go and say, well, okay, well, I'll just, copy this line 5 times. Okay, so something like that. Now, the problem with this is that, yes, it does work, but this is called what we call a brute force solution. Now, a brute force solution is basically where you just code every possible situation. And although it technically would work, it's not considered to be a very elegant solution, nor is it considered to be a good way of solving a problem. And the reason why it's not a good way of solving a problem is because in this case, it works because I only need 5 times. But what if I wanted to do 5,000 times, right? Or what if I wanted to do it until someone told me to stop, right? Or something like that. Then this method wouldn't work anymore, right? So brute force solutions tend to take a lot of code. They tend to be very, very simplistic, and they just tend to only work in very specific instances, but are not generally robust for a lot of different types of programming. Okay. To continue with the example I had is, what if I wanted to do this 500 times? It's not really efficient for me to go and copy this 500 times. The other thing is that I can't be sure, well, it's going to be very difficult to be sure that this is actually going to work, going to be 500. I could have miscounted. And then what if I needed something to go 5,000 or 5 million, right? All of a sudden, I've got to write 5 million lines of code and I've got to copy it out over and over again, which would make things really, really difficult. Okay, so this is while this would work if you were doing, say, less than 10, I suppose, it's generally not considered to be a good way of programming. Instead, what would be good is if we just told the computer to, hey, execute this code 5 times or a given number of times. And we can do this using a while statement or a do while statement. Okay, I'm going to start with a while statement. And in order to use this, what we typically do is we make a counter. Okay, the counter is usually an integer. And I'm going to have that counter count at 0, or start counting at 0. Now, what the counter is going to do is going to keep track of how many times the computer has done this. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is introduce a code that says while. Okay, and the word while in the English language basically means as long as. Okay, so I'm going to say while the counter is less than 5. Okay. And then I'm going to introduce a body of code. So that's what these scope brackets are for. Okay, to say what's inside the while loop. Okay, so what I have is while the counter is less than 5, print hello world. Now, if I was going to execute this program right now, the program would run forever. Okay, it goes into what's called an infinite loop. Okay, I'll just demonstrate this right here. Okay, and you can see the code is running infinitely. And the reason why is because the counter is set to be 0, and this says, as long as the counter is less than 5, keep doing this. And the problem is the counter never changes because it's always 0. So what we have to do is we have to put an incrementer in here. So counter plus plus. Okay, and what that will allow us to do here is to to increment the counter every time we do an iteration, and this will eventually approach the limit of 5 that we set. So what we have is counter equals 0. It'll print hello world, and then counter will become 1. Then it goes back up to the top of the loop, says hello world, and then the counter becomes 2, and then hello world, counter 3, hello world, counter 4, hello world, counter 5, and then we'll stop. Okay, and at the end, I could say cout, and just print out what the counter was. Okay, and we'll see what happens here. Okay, so I have hello world, hello world, hello world, hello world, hello world 5 times. The counter is 5. Okay, so I can see then that the counter was 5, and sometimes people get confused and they say, well, why did the counter stop at 5? Well, the reason why is because we said less than 5, and 5 is the first time that this number is less than 5. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, when we get this, we can also have different things as well. We could have an and another variable is something, or is another variable is something. But for now, I'm going to keep it kind of simple. Right? That's essentially how the while loop works. Right? Now, counter to the while loop is not counter really, but a parallel of the while loop is something called the do while loop. And the do while loop is actually very similar. Okay, so I'm going to show you it here. Okay, it looks very much the same, except the while comes after. Okay, it has a semicolon at the end, and the reason why this is the only one that has a semicolon at the end is because this one is, well, this is the end of the command. Okay, whereas all the other constructs are the beginning of commands, so they don't get semicolons at the end of them. Okay, so I have do and while. Okay, so do this while counter is less than 5. So do this as long as the counter is less than 5, and we'll see what happens here. Okay, and so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and the counter is 5. Okay, and so we're able to loop again 5 times. Now, a lot of people at this point might be saying, well, aren't they the same then? Or they must be the same. Well, actually, they're not the same. Okay, and the difference between them is only a really, really slight difference. Okay, but it's a pretty important difference. Okay, a do while is different than a while in one respect, and I'll demonstrate this here. What if I were to change this into a 5? Okay, now the counter, this loop is only supposed to run as long as the counter is less than 5. Okay, but let's see what happens here. Okay, so when I run this, okay, it still says hello world 1 time, and it proves that the counter was 5 because now it became 6. Okay, right here. So the counter was 5, and it went into here, printed out the line, counter became 6, and then it stopped. Okay, let's go back to when it was a while loop. Okay, and I'll change this to 5. Okay, and now it just says counter is 5. It didn't execute the body of the loop at all. Right? So there's the difference between the while and the do while. And I guess to just state it plainly, a while loop is, I'm just going to copy this here. Okay, so I have while. I'm going to change this one to do while so I can talk about the differences between them. Okay. The difference between these two, even though they appear to be functioning the same, well, essentially the same, is when they check the condition. A while loop checks the condition at the beginning of the loop, and then if the condition is met, it continues looping. Okay? A do while does not check the condition at the beginning. It just runs the body, and then checks the condition at the end. Alright? So that's the main difference. Now, it doesn't really matter which one you use. Just some are more appropriate for different situations than others. For instance, I might have a game, for instance, and at the end of the game I might say, would you like to play again? In that case, I might want to use a do while. Okay, because it would make sense to do the game first, and then at the end of the game ask the player if they want to go back to the beginning, right? Rather than say, hey, at the beginning ask them if they want to play again, because that wouldn't make sense because they haven't even played yet, right? A while loop might be good. For instance, if you had the user input some number, say like how many times do you want to print this on the screen, and if the user entered 0, it wouldn't make sense for the computer to print it one time and then check it, right? And in that case, you wouldn't want to print it at all. So in that case, a while loop might be better than a do while. Okay, essentially, they work the same. It doesn't really matter in a lot of cases which one you use, but for the most part, it's really just situational. It just depends on what you're trying to do. Right? But yeah, really that's it for while and do while. They're fairly simple concepts. They're pretty easy to use. There's one other thing I should state is that the reason why we use while and do while is typically when you are unsure of how many times you want to do something. Okay, so what that means is, for instance, if the problem is to do something 10,000 times, you wouldn't use either of these. You'd use the next construct, which is the for loop, which I'm going to discuss in the next video. But if I wanted to do something like 10,000 times, I know that the number is 10,000 times, right? So I wouldn't use these. Right? That's a general rule that I use, and it's not hard and fast. If you really wanted to just use this to make something go 10,000 times, that would be totally okay. But typically, I use while loops and do while loops when I'm waiting for something to happen. Right? So if I'm going to multiply numbers in a pattern until I reach a certain number, right? I might not know when that number is going to appear. Then I'd use a while or a do while. Or I might continue to take input from the user until the user tells me to stop doing something. Then I'd use a while or a do while. Or I might wait for a certain time to appear, or a certain other set of conditions from a sensor or something like that. Those would be situations when I'd use a while or a do while, right? Because I don't know how long it's going to take or how many iterations it will take for the result to happen. Alright, so anyways, that's really it for while and do while. If you have any questions about it, please drop a comment in the comment box or send me an email and I'll try and answer your question. If you do like the video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you do like this series, then consider subscribing. Have a great day.